Welcome to Activity 2 of the Resource and Talent Planning assignment, which is also known as 5RST. This activity is to have a look at the role of government, employers and trade unions in ensuring the future skills needs are met. As always, before we start this session, can you take 5 minutes and make an entry on your development record? Now remember that this entry should tie in with one of the entries you have on your development plan. So pause the video, take a couple of minutes, make your entry on your development record, and when you're ready, come back and resume the video. Before we start to have a look at this week's activity, let's think about Activity 1 that we looked at a couple of weeks ago. So for this activity we concentrated on the labour market conditions within the UK. We had a look at the fact that we could have a tight or a loose labour market, and we also had a look at some of the trends which are having an impact on labour market conditions. So during the lesson we had a look at wage inequalities, differences between public and private sector and so on. And one of the other aspects of this assignment or this activity is to consider how employers position themselves strategically in a competitive labour market. So we'll concentrate on this aspect of Activity 1 for our review. So in last week's session we discovered that some industries or professions in the UK are experiencing a talent squeeze. Now we know that there are some trends within the labour market which are contributing to this. So we identified that we have an ageing population, and added to this we have a decrease in birth rates. Added to this we have an increased life expectancy. So all of these combined contribute to us having a reduced talent pool. Now, according to the Department of Trade and Industry in 2001, they stated that the 21st century organisations require a flexible, highly skilled workforce which is adaptable to change and able to compete in the global marketplace. Now, in the session where we looked at labour market conditions, we also looked at another model which preceded this statement from the Department of Trade and Industry, and this model was created in 1984. See if you can remember the name of the model. Now, with fewer people to choose from, organisations need to make themselves as attractive as possible to potential and existing employees, and this is the focus of our review today. So another aspect of Activity 1 is how employers position themselves strategically in a competitive labour market. Now it's important that you don't miss this section out. This is written in the actual question which is on the assignment brief and is not separately listed in the checklist, so it would be easy to oversee this section. However, you do need to address this, and we'll have a look at some of the ways that employees can tackle a competitive labour market now. So in Taylor and Woodham's there are 6 different ways the companies can use. Have a go at seeing if you can identify any ways, and it may be easier for you to consider your own company and see if they come up with any initiatives that they use if they're trying to recruit people from a competitive labour market. So if you're trying to recruit doctors and nurses, if you're trying to recruit engineers or perhaps HGV drivers, what does your company do to try to position themselves strategically? So pause the video, take a few minutes and see if you can come up with any ideas. There are 6 different ideas listed in Taylor and Woodham's, so when you've had a go at identifying some, we'll move on to compare your answers. So when markets are tight, employers are required to be more creative with their people management recruitment strategies, so they often focus on the following. Employer branding is the first one, And this term basically means all of the activities which are designed to create or formulate a specific personality for the company. So this tries to make the organisation more attractive for prospective employees. The next one is recruitment initiatives. So a company may invest more money in innovative recruitment techniques which target a broader pool of potential applicants. Or the company might include retention strategies. So for this you might investigate the reasons for people leaving the organisation and find ways to tackle this, or to try to identify the problem and eradicate it from the organisation. The organisation itself may go through a reorganisation or a restructure, so they may change the way that the job tasks are allocated in order to minimise the need for hard to recruit for staff. So you might have a skills mix review which can be carried out to ensure that the people who are the hardest to recruit, so these are usually the people with specific skills, that they could spend all of their time on the tasks that only they can complete, and that other things are delegated to other people. They may undertake development initiatives, so this includes enhancing the skills of the current workforce and then bringing in people who do not have the required skills yet but who are interested in developing them. And the final one is long-term resource planning. So for this one, the company could collaborate with local universities or even training providers to increase the number of people with the relevant skills in the future. So if you'd like to read more about this, you can have a look at Taylor and Woodham's on page 53, and that's Taylor and Woodham's Human Resource Management, People and Organisations. So that's the one with the zebra on the front of the book. So out of the options that we discussed on the previous slide, employer branding may be the one that you know least about. Employer branding is a set of attributes and qualities which are often intangible that makes an organisation distinctive, and it promises a particular kind of employment experience and appeals to those people who will thrive and perform best within its culture. So basically this means that the organisation will set about creating a personality for the organisation which they will then use and adapt through all of their recruitment initiatives. It helps to attract people to their organisation that they think will fit in or thrive within the organisation. So if you need to read more about employer branding, there is a fact sheet on the CIPD website. Now it's important that we use or we understand employer branding because successive CIPD resource and talent planning surveys have shown that a large proportion of organisations report difficulties in recruiting, and we've discussed this in class ourselves. And we know that more organisations are starting to focus on developing and retaining in-house talent, and many organisations report difficulties in retaining staff, and that's particularly within management and the professional levels. So we've just been talking about branding, and here's a bit of fun based on some companies' logos. See if you can spot the hidden messages. So the first one is FedEx. Then Amazon. The next is the Pittsburgh Zoo. The next is the Tour de France. And the next one is Toblerone. So we'll have a look at the answers to these in next week's session. So the aims and objectives of Activity 2 are: the aim is to introduce you to some initiatives designed to closing the skills gap. And Activity 2 itself asks you to give a brief description of the role of government, employers and trade unions in ensuring the future skills needs are met. So our objectives are to investigate government funding for more apprenticeships, to examine the development of employer-led professional standards, so for example the Trailblazers, and then to explain the contribution of union learning reps. So let's have a look at the first objective, which was to investigate government funding for more apprenticeships. So why is the government concerned with this? Well, the first issue is that there's a discrepancy between the nature of skills needed by UK employers and the level of skill available in the working age population. And you gave examples last week of this applying to engineers, nurses, doctors, HGV drivers, IT professionals, and so on. And the other issue is the failure of the UK to compete on a global scale owing to skill levels. The government have been aware of this skills gap for many years, and they commissioned some research to be done in the early 2000s. The result of that was the LEAT report, which was published in 2006. Now, the main aims or the main recommendations from this report were to improve the levels of basic skills, but also to improve the levels of higher level specialist, professional and technical skills. Now, on the back of this, a world-class skills white paper was written, and this set targets for the year 2020. Now, some of the targets included in the white paper include that 95% of adults should be functionally literate and numerate by 2020. We're currently standing at 85% and 79% respectively. Another target was that over 90% of adults should have gained a level 2 qualification, which is the equivalent of a GCSE. So you can see the first two targets have been achieved by the government raising the leaving age for school leavers, so it's now being raised, and also the requirement for you to resit your English and Maths GCSE until you achieve a grade C. Another target was for 500 people to be enrolled on apprenticeship programmes, and so this has brought about the launch of our apprenticeship scheme, or the apprenticeship levy. Now, the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills had a report which was entitled Skills for Sustainable Growth, and this concentrated on the higher level skills that would be needed for us to sustain economic growth within this country. So take a look at this report and have a look at the executive summary. So once you've read the executive summary, there's another document that you can have a look at, which is a government speech by Nicky Morgan, who at the time presented in Parliament on closing the skills gap and our plan for education. So have a look at the two documents, and when you're done, your task is to compile a brief description of the role of government in ensuring future skills needs are met. So you would aim for 200 words, and within this you'd address the fact that there is a focus on closing the skills gap, there will be funding made available and targets set. Now, when you've compiled your 200 words, you should enter them onto the Moodle forum, and this will allow you to share ideas and best practice for answering part of activity 2. So the second part of activity 2 is to examine the development of employer-led professional standards, and these have been completed by Trailblazers, or are known as Trailblazers. Now, the government website gov.uk has lots of information about the apprenticeship programme and also about Trailblazers and the new standards. So you can have a look at this link here, which is a speech about apprenticeship and Trailblazers in particular. But have a look at the website and see if you can find anything that applies to your own organisation. It might be that you've been included as part of a Trailblazer project within your own organisation if you've been part of trying to produce the standards for your industry. It might be that you have taken on or you have an apprenticeship programme within your organisation, and then you're able to relate to this directly. In any case, whether you have personal experience or whether you've had no experience at all, after reading this link, the speech via the link, and having a look at the gov.uk website, you should compile a brief description of the role of Trailblazers in ensuring the future skills needs are met, and aim for about 200 words for this. And again, when you've completed your 200 words, you can upload them into the Moodle forum. The third part of Activity 2 is to explain the contribution of Union Learning representatives, and on the Union Learn website they state a key contribution to the learning and skills agenda is the ability of Union Learning reps to engage learners that are otherwise hard for providers to reach. ULRs offer support and guidance to learners throughout their learning journey, and it's important to note that the support is ongoing. Now, through research, it's been identified that those people who are hard to reach come from minority communities or perhaps low-income backgrounds. And so we do have a skills shortage within this country, and therefore we need to make our learning and skills agenda as inclusive as possible, and that's the contribution that the ULRs can make to this. So have a look at this link and have a read about Union Learning reps and their contribution that they make to the learning and skills agenda. So when you've completed your reading, you need to compile a brief description of the role of Union Learning representatives in ensuring the future skills needs are met, and you should aim for about 200 words for this. And as with the previous activities, once you're done, upload this onto the Moodle forum. So you'll see through this session, our aim was to introduce the initiatives designed at closing the skills gap, and we've achieved our objectives of investigating the government funding for more apprenticeships. So you'll have done this by having a look at the BIS website and also the speech from Nicky Morgan to government about funding and focus on more apprenticeship enrolments. And if you've completed your 200 words and uploaded them onto Moodle, you'll see that you've managed to complete Objective 1. Now, Objective 2 was to examine the development of employer-led professional standards, or Trailblazers, and having a look at the reading available on the gov.uk website, and also having a look to see if there was anything that related in particular to your organisation or your industry. You may have completed your 200 words and uploaded them onto Moodle, and if you did, then you will have achieved Objective 2. Now, the final objective was to explain the contribution of Union Learning representatives, and by having a look at the Union Learn website and then completing your 200 words, you will have been able to achieve this objective. Now, you may have submitted them to the Moodle forum, in which case you will be able to view other people's 200 words for each of these objectives too. Now, this is good in principle because you'll be able to read other people's entries and share best practice. What this also means is that you have in effect answered Activity 2 for this assignment. So you can take your 200 words for each of the objectives and slot them into the workbook for 5 RST. What you need to be aware of is that you won't be able to directly copy and paste somebody else's entry from the Moodle forum. However, you can take ideas and use them to improve your own answer if that's needed. So for the final 2 slides, I have the bibliography that I've used for this session. So as usual, this first slide has some mistakes on each individual entry. So pause the video and have a go at seeing if you can identify where the mistakes are. When you're ready, resume the video and it will take you to the next slide, which will explain the mistakes and also the answers. So let's have a look at the individual bibliography entries. So you'll notice that number 1 and number 2 from the previous slides have now switched positions, and this is because both of them are gov.uk 2015 articles. So in this situation, you move to the title of the article and apply alphabetical ordering. So in this case, Apprenticeship Trailblazers moves into position 1, whereas Closing the Skills Gap moves into the second position. The third entry is another gov.uk document, and it was the access date that was missing here. The next entry is a textbook which was written by Stephen Taylor and is Resource and Talent Management. In this situation, London CIPD is where the book was published, and then the publishing house is CIPD. On the previous slide, these were offered in the alternative order, so CIPD and London. This is incorrect, as the publishing house is always the last item that is stated or included in the bibliography entry for a textbook. Taylor S and Woodham C, Managing People and Organisations, it was the full stops after the S for Stephen and C for Carol. Union Learn, this was because the full hyperlink was not given for the Union Learning Reps page. And the final one was Walker P, Employer Branding, where the title of the textbook was not offered in italics. So that brings us to the end of this session for Activity 2. And if you've completed each of the activities or tasks along the way for each of the objectives, I hope that you'll agree that it's time well spent, as you'll be able to copy and paste your 200 words for each objective into the workbook for 5RST, and this is Activity 2 completed.